and when you go through the bars system for communicating. If you do that, you're not going to be confrontational. You're going to be over delivering. You're going to be servicing way beyond the value that they expected in the first place. You're going to be doing the best that you possibly could be doing. That is not confrontational. So stop saying that first and foremost. And don't hide behind email or text or a phone call because it just increases the risk of having misunderstandings and it's not worth it. This is the Dog Sitter's House podcast. Hello, you fabulous dog sitter. Welcome back to the Dog Sitter's House podcast. I am your host, April, and thank you for being here. I am kind of excited about talking about this subject today because I'm actually surprised because I did not quite know where I was going to go with this one, but I kept running into people asking me and people on Facebook asking questions in my different business groups and stuff. How do you handle this XYZ, situation with a customer? How do you have this conversation with a customer? What do you say to a customer when they do this or respond that way or their dog does that or there's so many different scenarios, especially since we're dealing with people's dogs. We're dealing with animals. Chances are you and I are a lot more of an expert, even if you're not certified trainer or anything like that. Just the fact that you are on the ground working 24/7 with dogs every day in and day out, or you decided to get into this, you're going to learn real quick a lot more than your average dog owner knows. And because of that, you are going to have to kind of teach your customers in a way that's, maybe not that they signed up for, but there's going to probably be some uncomfortable conversations that you're going to need to have over the course of your business with customers. And it could be about things that their dogs are doing. And, it could be about them, things that they're doing too. Don't get me wrong. There's so many different things that can pop up and can end up being really uncomfortable to speak about. And, when it comes to telling people something bad about their dog, that, they can be like a lot of human parents these days, where they don't want to hear it and they just immediately shut down and think, oh, not my dog, because you know how it goes. Their dog is a perfect angel at home. They don't get to see what their dog is like in a pack atmosphere. And so they don't understand, they can't comprehend what it is you're talking about because my dog's an angel, right? And rightfully so. They probably are when they're home. And those that aren't the customers are more forgiving, like, yeah, I know. But in any case, it's something I see popping up. It's questions I get a lot on how do you handle this situation? How do you talk to a customer about that? What do you say? What do you say when you have a difficult, uncomfortable, awkward conversation that you need to have with a customer? And how do you make sure that, you eliminate those heebie-jeebies? Because everybody gets the heebie-jeebies when it comes to having to do anything uncomfortable or much less confrontational. So this episode is really about how to make difficult customer conversations easy, how to make those conversations less combative. You don't want it to feel like a combative conversation. You don't want it to feel like you're attacking the customer. But at the same time, you probably need to put your foot down about something. You need to set your boundaries around something, and rightfully so. So let's dive into how we can make those difficult customer conversations easy. Number one, the first thing I would suggest is to review where you are emotionally about the situation first and foremost. Think about, can it wait? Is this something that is so urgent that it can't wait? Because if not, just trust me, most everything can wait a few days, maybe even a week or two. And at that gives you a chance to really bring down your emotions and settle your emotions around the situation. Once you've had that chance to really reduce your emotions around the situation, you can approach it and any conversations with a much more level head. And I think that's pretty reasonable and understandable for most of you. Now, the other thing I would say to be caution about if you're a woman, because I know there's a lot of women who do dog sitting, and in fact, like the majority that I have found are women. So, men, sorry, this conversation's not for you, or at least this section. The rest of it can be, but this little part. But it might be a little TMI, but for some of you, think about your cycle. Are you experiencing PMS at the moment? And could that be elevating the situation in your mind? I don't say this to cast blame on anyone. I literally say it because I intimately know the struggles of PMS, because my symptoms have always been severe from the very first cycle. So I totally get it. So for me, if I'm feeling a little heated about a customer's behavior, or I need to inform a customer about their dog's bad behavior, I check in with myself first and ask where I'm at in my cycle. And I also ask, like, have I been good about staying away from carbs and sugars for the last month? Because, I'm old enough to know, I've experimented enough to know like what my diet needs to be in order to reduce my symptoms. That has been the only cure that I have found that doesn't come with a whole host of side effects. So I started eating strictly carnivore, except for my addiction to my favorite protein bars, which is a whole different story that I'm still trying to work on. But they don't, I'm okay as long as I don't eat too many of those. And if I don't go off of my carnivore diet and eat too many, processed foods, fast food, just general regular food that most people eat, and I'm talking everything except for red meat, beef, butter, and eggs, and some bacon, right? Then I realize that I am much worse when it comes to my cycle. My mood can be much worse. The intensity of my feelings are like times 10. It's ridiculous. And so if I ask myself, okay, has my diet been in the way that I know works for me, so that my symptoms during my pre-cycle are less severe, they're more mild, then I can kind of get a good gauge on whether or not that's a good time for me to have a conversation that might be difficult with a customer. So just take all of those. I know, like I said, it might be a little TMI, but just take all of that into effect, because it really makes a big difference as to how you approach this. And the reason being is, if I approached a customer with a difficult conversation during a time, that I'm PMSing and my symptoms are really bad, everything's more intense for me. So even if I approach them in the most professional, diplomatic, kind way as I possibly can, for some reason, because of my energy at that time during the pre-cycle, I can come across as kind of harsh, even though I'm trying my best not to. So I know that about me. So be very self-aware about the things about you. This is just one example. There might be other things that that fit you and your personality and your biology, that might affect you and your mood and how you come across to people. So just really kind of go through that quickly and do a little self check, look in the mirror and say, okay, am I, making a mountain out of an anthill right now, or is this, really what it is? Is this, can I take this at face value? So if your frequency is anything less than feeling grateful, confident, and joyful at the moment that you approach them, you probably want to save those difficult conversations for another time. But even if you aren't affected by your cycle, your vibe can still be off kilter, causing you to come in a little too hot, they say. So use these three objectives. Use these three adjectives. That's how you say it, April. Adjectives. Again, these were grateful, confident, and joyful. Use these to kind of self-test whether it's a good time to have that conversation with your customer. Now, I get it. You might be saying, okay, yeah, right, April. Like, when I go to have a difficult conversation with a customer, the last thing I am feeling is grateful or joyful. And I totally get that, because when you're thinking about having that conversation, you're not going to feel grateful or joyful, right? But what I mean is, if you put the thought of having the conversation aside, then how do you feel in that moment? How have you been feeling all day? Putting the whole thought of talking to them aside, is everything else going well? Are you feeling peachy king? Is it sunshine and rainbows and pork chops and applesauce? Is it happy times? Because you really want to be in a very high vibe, good mood. I mean, you don't have to be Mary Poppins, but you just want to be making sure that otherwise you're having a good day. Yeah, you're kind of a little on edge about having this conversation maybe, but other than that, are you feeling grateful and joyful? Are you able to easily find something that you're grateful for? And if it wasn't for the doom and gloom conversation that is ahead of you, are you otherwise having a joyful day, right? Can you find something in general that you can be grateful for? Because if you're in the moment and you ask yourself, like, what am I grateful for? And you're just like, your brain's like, nothing. I'm not grateful for anything right now. Da, da, da. And all you can think about is all the negatives. You're not in a good state. Because we can all find something to be grateful for when we're in a good state. At any time, there's always something to be grateful for. Even if you don't have anything staring you in the face to be grateful for, like, take, for example, you can always be grateful for not having a massive toothache, right? Like, I've had a massive toothache before that kept me awake for weeks on end. And I even got a speeding ticket because then I was late to work because I wasn't sleeping. My whole side of my face was swelling up, and the darn dentist just wasn't a very good dentist, and he kept sending me away and not doing anything about it, and it just kept getting worse and worse. And so, at any moment I can stop and say, you know what, I am grateful I don't have a toothache. If that's all I can be grateful for right now, at least I can be grateful for that. So find something to be grateful for, and if you can, then you know that you're kind of in a better space. You're better in a better headspace to be able to approach a difficult conversation. And then also, are you feeling confident? Do you feel confident in general that day? And do you feel confident about your position in the conversation that you need to have? Do you feel confident that the position you're taking on is right, is fair, has integrity? In other words, did you check yourself and make sure whatever your position about the topic is legit and professional? And that you weren't just, triggered by something that you couldn't handle, or something that maybe you could handle best without even involving the customer, right? Maybe you were triggered by something legit, but was it something that you could handle without involving the customer? And this leads me to point number 2, which is, do you really have to have that difficult conversation with your customer? I ask this because it's a perfect way to improve upon your policies or your terms and conditions, or your hours. I mean, it's really a perfect way to improve upon your business in general. Before I talk to a customer about what I believe is unacceptable behavior or unacceptable behavior about their dog, even. I check my system and my processes first. Is there a way that I could have prevented their behavior by improving my system or policies or training around my team or myself? If so, then the customer just gave me a gift as far as I see it. I look at it like this. Imagine your business is a bucket. And when you start your business, you don't know what you don't know, especially if it's your first business, which means you're going to have a bunch of holes in your bucket. The absolute best way to discover those holes is by looking at the things that frustrate you within your business, customers included. So every time I got frustrated with a customer, I did this by asking myself, what did I do wrong? Or how could I prevent this from ever happening again? That was probably the most important, crucial question I could ask myself. So when things go wrong, remember, ask yourself, how could I prevent this from ever happening again? And take full responsibility of the situation to the best of your ability. More often than not, I have to admit it was something that I could do better when I asked myself this question. I remember in the beginning that I was open until about, I think it was 8 p.m. every day, which was my first biggest mistake. But that's for a whole nother episode. And the majority of my customers respected this pickup time, but you always have those select few that just keep showing up late. It may have only been 10 or 15 minutes, but I don't know. Let's do the math. Okay. When you have a different customer showing up 15 minutes late every or even every other night, you're basically working an extra hour per week if it happens just 4 times a week. And chances are you had a hot dinner ready to eat at closing time on the nose, 8 o'clock. But now you have to interrupt your dinner and let it get cold because you're out there talking to the customer as they're picking up their dog 15 minutes after, and you're still working. And if you're working 14-hour days like I was at the time, this gets old really quick. Now, I could have had an awkward conversation with the customers and asked them to be on time, which I think I did do once or twice for the chronic offenders. But overall, this did not improve matters much. So I really had to figure out a way to overcome this better. So I thought about how I could better motivate people to be on time. And that's when I implemented a late pickup fee, making it pricey enough that it lit a fire under people to arrive on time. I think it's like the funny thing is ever since I implemented it, I think I've literally only used it once, and it's been in place for, I don't know, at least 5 years, I would say by now. So that's how well this works, is when it helps you put things in place and patch up those holes in your bucket. Then all of a sudden that problem goes away and you rarely have to deal with it. I think it's like $25. I mean, it could be more, $35. I don't remember because I never have to use it because it works. These customers coming late were the greatest gift in retrospect because they truly helped me identify and patch up the holes in my bucket. That's why it's so important to look at what's triggering you and whether it's just exposing a hole in your bucket, i.e., your business. I didn't have to have a difficult conversation with anyone about being late anymore after I sent out a notice of my policy changes and included my late pickup fees. Because whether you are keeping them as a customer or not, you still want to reduce the chances of receiving a bad review. Am I right or am I right? So, this is the system that I like to use. It's kind of a little system that I came up with the acronym of BARS. So, to make it easier to remember, think of bars: B as in boy, A as in apple, R as in rich, S as in Sam. We have bars spelled out. B stands for brain dump. Okay, that is the first step. If you need to really have this conversation with a customer and you're not sure how to approach it to make sure it goes smoothly and easy, then do the first step, follow the BARS acronym, and that is brain dump. Basically, get it all out. You know what a brain dump is, right? Whether you write it out or type it out, just get all of your thoughts out about the situation, about what you want to say, everything on paper. Not only is this going to help you gather your thoughts about the situation and how to communicate it to them, but you can also use this to deflate yourself if you're still feeling hot headed about it all. The best way to rid ourselves of negative feelings is to get it all out of ourselves. And the best way to do that is on paper, where nobody's going to read it but us, and no harm, no foul, no matter what it is we say. So don't hold back, just let it all out. Okay. Now, when you get to the point where you're trying to compose what it is you're going to actually say to the customer, you want to get to the next step, which is approach. Approach with something positive. Find a genuine positive statement or opinion or behavior. Don't just make something up, don't lie just to butter them up, because they're going to see right through that. Actually find something genuinely positive to say. So if, for example, you have to tell them their dog is, say, too snippy with the pack, you could start out with something that you genuinely love about their dog. I had a customer who brought their puppy to me, and over the course of 1 or 2 years, I don't remember, and the puppy, was growing into 1 and 2 year old, he began to get really possessive around his balls. He loved to play fetch, but he started snarling and showing his teeth and threatening to bite other dogs and us humans if we came near his ball. So I had to have this really difficult conversation of telling the customer that if he kept it up, he would no longer be welcome here, because I'm not going to remove all of the toys out of our model, because part of our model, our value, our service is engaging the dogs in play throughout the day. In fact, we teach many of them how to be dogs. So we teach many of them that don't know how to fetch, that don't know how to leave it when they bring it back to you, how to do all that. Okay. So then they can go home and do that with their parents. And then their parents get the added benefit of not having to get up off the couch and chase them in order to play fetch with their dog. They can actually sit there and have their dog bring it back to them after a long day at work. How nice is that, right? It's a great bonus. So I'm not going to remove that from my entire service for one dog. So if he can't play and be nice and share his toys with the others in the pack like they all do, then he's got to go. I can't be putting all of my dogs or my team at risk, right? So I approached the conversation with telling the customer how smart her dog was, because legitimately he was. It was very genuine. He picked up so quickly on all of the command trainings that we taught him, and he was a professional at fetching ball, except for the leave it part. He would leave it if you would ask him to leave anything else, but when it came to his ball, he was super protective. So I told her, wow, he's really smart. He really picks up on things very quickly, but by approaching this customer with something genuinely positive about her dog, what I was doing was opening up the conversation without making her feel attacked or blindsided by it. So next in the acronym is R, bars, right? So BA, we're on to R. Next is R, and that stands for reframe. Okay, reframe the problem to show the customer the benefit or the consequences of the issue if not resolved. It's really, in my experience, it's very rare that this cannot be done. I'm not sure I've ever encountered a situation where I couldn't reframe the issue, to be honest with you. What this means is to communicate how the issue could be detrimental to the customer's dog or to them. In the case of this like toy possessive dog that I was talking about, I would point out how it could cause a fight and her dog could get bit. Instead of telling my concerns about her dog biting another dog, which was pretty obviously a concern, right? I only actually expressed my concerns of her dog's behavior provoking another dog to bite him. This put it in her perspective of how it's going to affect her beloved dog. But I really didn't stop there. And if possible, and you can do this, not always every situation affords this, but if you can do this, then add additional reframes. So instead of pointing out how bad her dog was and how he would be kicked out of our exclusive club if he didn't improve his behavior, I pointed out how grateful I was that we were catching this behavior while he was still young. And I mentioned how it's a lot harder to get a dog to change their behavior after it's become a habit for them. Which this now leads me to the next step when composing any kind of difficult conversation, and that is a solution. S stands for solution. Always find a way to suggest a possible solution to the customer. Chances are your customer is not as resourceful or educated about dog behavior as you are, since you work with dogs all day. So if you position yourself as part of the solution, you not only help the customer solve their problem likely, but you prevent the customer from making you the enemy, because now you're their partner in crime to help them solve their dog's behavior issue, right? So like I said, this isn't always something you can do when it comes to like your customers having bad behavior, not the dogs, but the actual humans. you know, you can maybe suggest some solutions that could help them out. Like I know I've suggested like customers using their GPS, even though they know how to get to me. They know exactly where I live, but still type it into the GPS to make sure you get an accurate ETA for me when you send it my way. That helps, So just wherever you can, always try to provide a solution or resources to where they could get a solution. So naturally, in the same example I've been using with my customer who had a dog who was possessive over toys, I suggested the customer seek a behaviorist trainer. And I would have even recommended one had I known one at the time, but unfortunately I didn't. So this was a perfect way to have this difficult conversation because I did not attack the customer. I reframed the situation that showed her the consequences she or her dog could face if the situation wasn't addressed. And I gave her a possible solution to take action in solving that problem, while confidently expressing my concerns about her dog not being able to visit if it didn't improve over the next few months in order to ensure everyone's safety. I actually added more to the conversation than this, but it isn't something that you can always do. But when you can, it's even more powerful because what it does is it further positions you as the expert and one who is over delivering. Anytime you can over deliver for your customers and give them more than what they're paying for, you are going to be in the positive light. So before mentioning the solution of finding a trainer, I explained to her, I think literally 2 or 3 times upon her pickup times, I explained to her a few different ways that she could start rehabbing her dog's behavior around toys, his possessiveness. I mean, I literally would spend 5-10 minutes demonstrating how she could do it. I would get her dog, separate it from the pack. The pack would be inside. And I would get her dog and I'd have treats or whatever, and I would do what I needed to do to demonstrate how she can start to correct her dog's behavior through a variety of ways, not dealing with anything to do with any harm or no shock collars or anything, right? And while doing this, I advised that these were methods that we had been implementing while working with her dog, but that it was only going to be effective if it was kept consistent while at home too. Because I told her we would have a little bit of progress while he was with us. We would see that it was working, and then he'd go away for a week. He'd come back for daycare the next week, and we were back to square one. Right. And I wasn't saying that, like, I put it in a way so that it didn't blame her. I was just saying, like, yeah, we're having, some improvement, but then we're noticing when he comes back, it's we have to kind of start over again. So I thought it would be good if I gave you this information too, and you could keep it consistent, work with him consistently at home the same way we are. And then that way as a team, we can help him around the situation. And funny enough, when I did all this, guess what she admitted to me? She admitted that it was her family's first dog, and they always got scared when he growled. Now, mind you, he was probably play growling at first when he would play with the ball and they try to grab it. You know how dogs will play growl. He was probably play growling. He did that with us, from the get-go, like a lot of dogs do. So what she admitted to me was that they'd always got scared, and so they'd back off and they'd let him win, basically. He'd always get to win by doing that. And it even got so bad that she said he actually attempted to bite her and her husband a couple of times at that point. But because they didn't know what to do and they weren't giving the dog any consequences for that behavior, like a timeout, like remove your ball from you, whatever, it scared them, and they just let him continue with that behavior, and he learned how to be more possessive. So I expressed to her how it would only get worse if they didn't address this now, and that one day he would probably bite someone if they didn't take care of it right away. This was super helpful for me because now I could follow up on their progress at home and if they were working with him or not. I could ask questions like, how's he doing with the training? How are you guys working with him? How's it coming? But unfortunately, every time I did, she admitted that they weren't really doing any training. So unfortunately, that dog did not really change his behavior over the next few months. In fact, I noticed it was only getting worse. And I have a pretty strict policy. I mean, he'd only tried to, he didn't really fully try to bite myself or any of the team members, but he gave the warning, right? He was telling us like, hey, I might bite you if you keep this up, right? And so I don't mess around. I knock on wood. I have 6 years of absolutely no dog fights, no dog bites whatsoever. Dog to dog, dog to human, human to dog. Just kidding. No, I mean, I really don't know humans bite dogs around here. But I'd like to keep it that way. And so, when I'm talking about seeing these behaviors with him, I'm not saying I waited until it got really bad. I let her know right away so that over the next few months we could monitor his behavior and see if it was progressing or decreasing before it got to the point that he would actually do something. And unfortunately, it just kept getting worse. So I had to let him go. Except when I told her that he couldn't come back anymore, I said he could come back again if, on the stipulation, right? If she could show me that he got some training and was doing much better around that. And then this way I left her the opportunity and hopefully motivation to get her dog help before he bit someone. You see, when you approach these difficult conversations from the mindset or heart set of serving, then no matter what the situation is, as long as you provide a serving heart, serving solutions, serving suggestions, it's not only going to prevent customers from writing a bad review about you or your business, but it's also going to make you feel good because you've done the best that you possibly could for that customer and their fur baby. Sadly, in my situation, in this example, he never did return. And I don't have a whole lot of confidence that they sought professional help, but at least I knew I could sleep at night because I did all I could do. So I hope this didn't come off as, braggadocious about myself. I just really want to give you a concrete and tangible example of how to make difficult conversations with customers easy. I know there are infinite number of scenarios that could come up that you might need to address with your customers. But what I have found that has been most successful is using the simple BARS system. Again, BARS stands for brain dump, approach with a positive, reframe as a benefit or consequence for the customer, and follow up with a solution. S for solution. And this can be applied to nearly every single situation from what I've encountered and from what my clients have encountered. And on a side note, always have these conversations face to face with your customer. A lot of people they get the heebie jeebies around these awkward conversations that they don't want to be confrontational. They're like, oh, I'm not a confrontational person. First of all, stop saying that about yourself because it doesn't mean you're being confrontational. Like I displayed in this example here today, and when you go through the BARS system for communicating, if you do that, you're not going to be confrontational. You're going to be over delivering. You're going to be servicing way beyond the value that they expected in the first place. You're going to be doing the best that you possibly could be doing. That is not confrontational. So stop saying that first and foremost. And don't hide behind email or text or a phone call because it just increases the risk of having misunderstandings and it's not worth it. After I write out my response, what I do is I test it. I test it by reading it out loud to make sure it doesn't sound like I'm throwing darts at the customer, because when I'm writing it, I might be like, yeah, this is really professional and diplomatic. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And then I'll read it out loud and I'm like, that sounds kind of accusatory. And so I have to rework it, which is fine. That's the whole purpose of the brain dump, right? So you don't want to throw customer darts at the customer or their dog. And I try to find a way to add a little gratitude on the end by reminding the customer how much I appreciate their business or them or their support. Or if you can't find something to say I appreciate you about without coming off like you're trying to, just butter them up, then say I appreciate you having an open mind and hearing me out. Because if in their mind they're sitting there kind of getting defensive and they haven't voiced that out loud to you yet, you're going to diffuse that immediately upon saying, I really appreciate you having an open mind and hearing me out. It's great. I don't say that to be manipulative or anything. It is just the most effective and professional way to deal with people, to deal with difficult conversations. And you might not memorize what you wrote down and you might not recite it verbatim. That's fine. Don't try to memorize it. It's not a speech, okay? It's just for you to gather your thoughts, collect your thoughts, have a few things that you're going to say, and you can work around that when you see the customer, again, face to face. But because you took the time to think it all the way through and have this general outline of what you'll say, I guarantee you having the conversation will be much, much easier. And it typically yields positive results for everyone involved, you, the customer, and the dog. And you may even bump up the customer's impression of you a couple of notches, which, never really hurts when you're in the service-based business, right? So hopefully this helps you if you are facing or come upon any situations in your business with a customer where you start feeling the heebie-jeebies because you have to have what used to be a quote unquote difficult conversation, but now you can make it easy. Thanks so much for listening, and happy tales to you.